Do you know how drugs ruined Hitler and even influenced the course of World War II? The footage you're watching is a genuine historical image of Hitler's last public appearance on March 20th, 1945. He emerged from his Berlin bunker to present medals to young soldiers. Hitler, now frail and less energetic than usual, smiled for the camera, shaking hands and chatting affably with the soldiers. On the surface, he appeared healthy, but a different angle, from behind, revealed his left hand trembling uncontrollably. This suggests that Hitler was deeply affected by drugs and could only survive with daily injections. This is completely different from the image of the energetic, ironclad Führer we often associate with passionate speeches and inspiring the masses with his passionate emotions. So, how did Hitler become addicted to drugs? How did these drugs affect him? More importantly, how did they invisibly alter the course of World War II? In this video, we uncover this little-known history and tell the story of Hitler's relationship with drugs. Before discussing Hitler's development of drug dependence, we need to review his personal health history. Before the outbreak of World War II, Hitler's physical condition was actually very different from the image of frenzy and weakness he displayed in the later stages of the war. Let's go back to Hitler's adolescence. As a child, Hitler was thin and frail, but he did not suffer from any serious illnesses and was generally in good health. As an adult, the young Hitler twice applied to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, but both attempts failed. Forced to survive, he resorted to selling paintings, living in poverty, and living in a very simple environment. The malnutrition caused by poverty made him appear thinner than his peers. Coupled with a lack of regular sleep and rest, his health during this period was characterized by depression, loneliness, and barely adequate physical support. Hitler's seemingly ordinary, repetitive daily routine was a game-changer. However, the outbreak of World War I in 1914 completely changed Hitler's circumstances. For him, who had lost his memory at the time, war felt like a calling of fate. He finally escaped the poverty of Vienna, donned a German military uniform, and became a communications sergeant in the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment. Compared to ordinary frontline infantry, signalmen were required to relay orders amidst the fiercest battles. While this mission was dangerous, it was somewhat less daunting than fighting the trenches all day. Long military service made him stronger than before. Training and marching honed his physical fitness and gave him a sense of belonging for the first time. Hitler's endurance and bravery on the battlefield earned him the Iron Cross. For this down-and-out young man, repeatedly frustrated by reality, the battlefield offered not only an escape, but also a stage to prove his worth. However, injuries were also inevitable amidst the relentless artillery fire. At the Battle of the Emmer, he was wounded in the leg and hospitalized for months of recuperation. At the Battle of Ypres in 1918, he was exposed to mustard gas, which temporarily blinded him. Although he suffered significant injuries, he generally recovered well. After the end of World War I, Hitler retired from the army and returned to Munich, where he entered politics and led the Nazi Party on its road to power. During this period, Hitler's health remained generally stable. He didn't smoke or drink, and he adhered to fast food. These habits led to a widespread perception of self-discipline and health. In public, he was energetic and capable of delivering long speeches. His voice and powerful aura made his speeches highly appealing, winning him a large following. However, in 1933, with the rise of the Nazi Party and Hitler's rise to power, his workload increased. Long meetings, frequent speeches, and endless diplomatic engagements, coupled with his irregular work schedule, he often worked late at night and slept during the day, took a toll on his health, manifesting in three main problems. The first was gastrointestinal distress. His long-term vegetarian diet, with its limited nutritional profile and lack of animal protein, led to indigestion, frequent bloating, and stomach pain. Second, neurasthenia and insomnia. After coming to power, Hitler concentrated all power in his own hands. He had to lead the military, handle government affairs, and various diplomatic matters. He often held meetings all night and slept during the day, disrupting his biological function and causing headaches and insomnia. Third, his mental instability. Hitler was already paranoid, neurotic, suspicious, and sensitive. The power struggles in Germany both excited and exhausted him, and he often flew into a rage over trivial matters. These intertwined problems left him in a state of chronic suboptimal health. Although many doctors attempted to treat Hitler, conventional prescriptions for these chronic illnesses were overly cautious, either advising him to rest or adjusting his diet. But Hitler, with his impatience, hated the idea of slow treatment and desired an immediate solution. This is where a miracle doctor who understood Hitler well emerged. Morell, Theodor Morell, perhaps not as widely known as Himmler, was a crucial figure in Hitler's life. It was this man and his series of booster shots that gradually pushed Hitler into the abyss of drug addiction. Morell was originally an ordinary private physician in Berlin, making a living by cultivating connections in high society. He was unremarkable, even a bit slovenly, chubby, and often reeked of alcohol. But he knew how to please his patients and was particularly adept at using various specialized therapies, including new drugs and Injections, with the goal of achieving rapid results. Morell had cured the illness of Hitler's full-time photographer Heinrich Hoffmann. So with Hoffmann's introduction, Morell met Hitler at a banquet in 1936. The cunning Morell realized that the future of wealth was right in front of him. So he assured Hitler that he had found a revolutionary way to cure Hitler's illness. And thus he successfully entered Hitler's sight. During the first treatment, Morell administered a cocktail of injections containing vitamin B1, glucose, an intestinal bacterial inhibitor, analgesics, and sedatives. After one injection, Hitler felt refreshed, his abdominal pain lessened, and his headaches temporarily disappeared. This immediate effect astounded Hitler, who felt he had found a miracle doctor who truly understood his body. From then on, Morell gradually replaced the others and became Hitler's personal physician. Morell was extremely flattering and accommodating to Hitler. When faced with Hitler's health problems, he never said no, always offering a so-called miracle cure that instantly alleviated Hitler's problems. This was in stark contrast to the cautious approach of other doctors, and this played into Hitler's hands. He believed that technology and medicine could work miracles, just as he believed in the power of willpower to change everything. Consequently, Morell successfully earned Hitler's trust and was granted extensive authority, including free access to the Führer's residence and the ability to interrupt, even combat meetings, just to give Hitler an injection. In the early stages, the medication Morell prescribed for Hitler was relatively standard, generally keeping his condition under control and achieving good results. From 1936 to 1939, Nazi Germany experienced a crucial period of expansion. During this period, Germany completed the rearmament of the Rhineland, annexed Austria, and occupied Czechoslovakia, achieving a series of political victories. The outside world always witnessed a vibrant and energetic Führer. At the Munich conference, he displayed confidence and composure when facing British Prime Minister Chamberlain, outwitting the appeased British and French leaders. During his tour of Austria, he stood high above, waving to countless people, seemingly full of energy. But behind these appearances, the drugs were secretly working. Whenever he felt exhausted, a shot from Morell would instantly restore his spirits. The drugs became the invisible pillar that maintained Hitler's superhuman image. However, over time, Hitler gradually developed a resistance to these injections, and their effectiveness became increasingly less noticeable. Thus, in 1938, Morell introduced a new drug into Hitler's injections, Pervitin. Its ingredient was methamphetamine, also known as ice. This was Germany's most popular stimulant, capable of keeping people awake for extended periods. Under the stimulation of Pervitin, Hitler became incredibly energized. He could hold meetings and command troops at night, and give speeches with his arms raised during the day. To outsiders, his energy seemed almost superhuman, but only Morell knew. The drug was behind this state of mind, but Hitler seemed quite pleased with it. Under his own promotion, Germany began distributing large quantities of Pervitin to the military, ensuring soldiers maintained a high level of fighting spirit for extended periods. Even ordinary Germans at the time frequently purchased Pervitin. Initially marketed as an anti-fatigue drug, it was sold openly in pharmacies by prescription, making it affordable for almost everyone. German media even touted Pervitin as making people more confident, happier, and more productive. Many use it to combat stress and boost their spirits, making a popular drug. It's safe to say that everyone in Germany at the time, from heads of state and military generals to ordinary soldiers and the general public, was practically on the drug. Under the drug's influence, the entire Nazi Germany experienced a false state of euphoria. These frenzied addicts were about to plunge the world into a new war. On September 1st, 1939, Germany launched a blitzkrieg against Poland, ushering in World War II. During the Battle of Poland and the Battle of France, German soldiers, fueled by the effects of Pervitin, completed extreme marches and fought day and night, maximizing the effectiveness of the blitzkrieg. In just 6 weeks, they defeated France, known as the continent's strongest power. During this period, Morell prescribed stronger doses of the drug to keep Hitler alert and ready to adjust to the ever-changing battlefield situation. After each injection, Hitler was in high spirits, enthusiastically discussing battle plans with his staff. The drug instilled in both the German army and the Führer himself a state of euphoria, seemingly omnipotent. Hitler attributed this state to willpower, but in reality, it was simply the stimulant providing the energy. From the outside, it was a military miracle, but from the inside, it was a drug-driven war. Victory in the Battle of France allowed Germany to avenge the humiliation of its defeat 20 years earlier. Hitler's prestige at home also reached its peak. The people enthusiastically supported Hitler, believing him to be Germany's savior. Hitler himself fell into a near-mythical state. He firmly believed that his intuition outperformed the judgment of professional generals, that the German army under his leadership was invincible, and that any risk could be overcome through willpower. This mentality was actually partly due to the effects of drugs. Stimulants gave him extraordinary confidence for a short period of time, even giving him the illusion of invincibility. However, the side effect was that he was more irritable, had no patience for opposition, and completely ignored the possibility of failure, making his strategy increasingly adventurous. Unsatisfied with the existing military achievements, Hitler launched the even more ambitious Operation Barbarossa. On June 22, 1941, more than 3 million German troops launched an offensive into the Soviet Union, thus launching the largest and most brutal Soviet-German war in human history. German tanks advanced at an astonishing speed, advancing hundreds of kilometers in just a few weeks and capturing millions of Soviet soldiers. Hitler confidently believed that the German army only needed 3 to 4 months to completely collapse the Soviet Union. He told those around him that the Soviet Union was like a house of cards, and that if we kicked it, it would fall. However, this excitement was soon shattered by reality. In the winter of 1941, the German army encountered stubborn Soviet resistance outside the city of Moscow. Coupled with the influence of extreme cold weather, the German troops were exhausted and their supply lines were too long. In order to be closer to the Eastern Front and easier to command, Hitler moved to the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia and made it his frontline headquarters. Between 1941 and 1944, Hitler stayed here most of the time, personally commanding the battle. However, the environment in the Wolf's Lair was not good. It was located between a forest and a lake, surrounded by wetlands, dense vegetation, and there were many mosquitoes. It was hot and humid in the summer and cold and unbearable in the winter. The harsh environment exacerbated Hitler's old illness. Due to the oppressive environment, physical discomfort, and the tremendous mental pressure caused by the deteriorating situation on the Eastern Front, Hitler's dependence on Morell's medication grew increasingly severe, requiring him to rely on injections almost daily to maintain his energy and spirits. If he stopped taking medication, he would experience extreme fatigue, worsening stomach pain, and depression. Unable to recover naturally, he could only demand Morell's injections. Quickly, over time, he no longer distinguished between antibiotics and drugs or stimulants. His only trust was Morell's injections. In early 1943, Germany's catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad shocked the world. Over 300,000 men of the Sixth Army were annihilated by the Soviets, dealing a devastating strategic blow to Germany. Following this, the German tank forces suffered another defeat at the Battle of Kursk, forcing the Eastern Front into a full-scale defensive operation. While Hitler continued to tout victory in his propaganda, he privately felt immense pressure. He knew that if he lost the war, he would be crushed by the Allies and, in particular, face a reckoning from his mortal enemy, Stalin. Faced with this predicament, an exhausted Hitler ordered Morell to keep himself in good spirits. Morell, however, pushed the limits of medical care. Archives show that after 1943, Morell administered at least one injection to Hitler almost daily, prescribing over 70 different medications, including methane, hexamethylene tetramine, barbiturates, hormones, and even animal testosterone extract. In other words, Hitler's body became a mobile laboratory with various drugs interacting with each other. Periodically, when Hitler developed a tolerance to existing medications, Morell's response was simply to drastically increase the dosage or switch to more potent drugs. During this period, Hitler's health deteriorated at an almost tangible rate. He was noticeably thinner, his complexion sallow, and he lacked the vigor and energy of his earlier years. Hitler's left hand also frequently trembled uncontrollably. In many public appearances, he was forced to clasp it tightly with his right hand or clasp it behind his back to conceal the awkwardness of the shaking. While the physical breakdown was merely an outward manifestation, the mental distortion had a more direct impact on the war effort. Chronic drug abuse had left Hitler mentally strained. He suspected that nearly everyone around him might betray him, leading to a suffocating atmosphere of mutual suspicion within the German military leadership. While the staff knew the Führer's judgments were becoming increasingly absurd, no one dared to speak out against them. They knew that whenever Hitler's eyes went blank and his emotions were high, the drugs were often taking effect, and any rebuttal would be futile. This unstable mental state led to disastrous consequences in a series of subsequent crucial military decisions, the most notable of which was Hitler's costly blunder during the Normandy landings. In the early morning hours of June 6, 1944, the Allied forces launched the Normandy landings, intending to open a second front on Europe's Western Front. This was another crucial moment in World War II. Faced with the overwhelming Allied forces, German frontline commanders quickly requested the mobilization of armored units for a counterattack. However, the German armored units were considered the highest reserve and required Hitler's personal approval for deployment. The problem was that Hitler was still sound asleep. His long-term dependence on Morell injections had completely disrupted his daily routine. He often relied on stimulants to work long hours at night, then used sedatives to force himself into a deep sleep. Waking Hitler rashly could not only trigger a seizure, but also cause him to become irritable and take his anger out on those around him. Therefore, none of his staff dared to disturb him. This put the German high command in an awkward position. At the crucial moment when swift decisions were most needed, the supreme commander was still soundly asleep. Hitler did not awaken until midday. However, the battlefield situation was rapidly changing. By the time he authorized the armored forces action, the Allies had already established a solid bridgehead at the collision head. Germany had missed the perfect opportunity to counterattack, and the war situation was irreversible. Another event in 1944 had a significant impact on Hitler's health: his assassination attempt. Nazi Germany was already in dire straits. With the Soviets' full-scale counterattack on the Eastern Front and the successful landings of the British and American allies in Normandy, Germany was doomed to failure. Some German officers and political elites gradually realized that they had to eliminate Hitler from a new government and negotiate peace with the Allies, or face utter destruction. So, a German Wehrmacht colonel, Stauffenberg, planned an assassination attempt. He was a severely wounded veteran who had lost an eye and a hand in combat. On the morning of July 20th, 1944, Stauffenberg entered the Führer's conference room at the Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia carrying a briefcase containing a bomb. He took the opportunity to put the briefcase under the conference table, close to Hitler's legs, and then left on the pretext of making a phone call. But unfortunately, after he left, the briefcase was also moved by someone else. A while later, the bomb exploded, and the conference room was severely damaged. 4 people died on the spot, and several people were seriously injured. However, Hitler escaped because he was far away from the bomb. Although the assassination attempt didn't take his life, it dealt a further blow to his already fragile body and mind. Physically, the huge explosion ruptured his eardrum and impaired his hearing. The shock wave from the explosion damaged the function of his arm and exacerbated his hand tremors. Mentally, he fell into extreme paranoia, immersed in conspiracy theories all day long, and almost completely lost trust in the Wehrmacht. Hitler carried out a brutal purge in the army. About 5,000 people were arrested and imprisoned for being implicated in the incident, and about 200 were executed, including many high-ranking elites, including Rommel, one of the 3 most famous German generals. After the assassination, Hitler seemed to have aged a lot overnight. He walked with a stagger, was hunched over, and had sunken eye sockets. Even Morell's medication could not restore his previous mental state. As Hitler's health deteriorated, the Nazi empire he controlled was also accelerating towards destruction. In the spring of 1945, the Third Reich was in turmoil. The Soviet Red Army launched a massive offensive on the Eastern Front, approaching Berlin. On the Western Front, the British and American Allied forces crossed the Rhine and approached the heart of Germany. Germany's industry, transportation, and military were on the verge of collapse. In the heart of Berlin, the bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery became Hitler's final retreat. This small, damp, and dim bunker, with no windows, was filled with a stuffy air. The constant sound of bombing and artillery fire could be heard from outside. Hitler's body was almost hollowed out by drugs. His hair was thinning, his face was gray, his eyes were dull, and his Parkinson's disease was so severe that his hands trembled so much that he couldn't even draw an accurate line on a battle map. He was no longer the leader who could inspire thousands with his speeches, but a patient who relied on drugs to survive. Morell remained the key figure in the bunker. During this period, he injected Hitler with drugs 3 times a day, a shot of glucose and stimulants in the morning to enable him to get up from meetings. During the day, he received an injection of painkillers and hormones to relieve his pain and discomfort, and at night, a shot of sleeping pills to help him sleep. Amid the bombing. But even though the drugs temporarily eased Hitler's pain, they could no longer support the collapse of an empire. On April 16, 1945, the Soviet Red Army was at the gates of Berlin, and the Battle of Berlin began. Over 2 million Soviet troops launched a fierce attack on Berlin, while only 800,000 German defenders were left to hold out. However, this resistance was futile against the Soviet Army's vast manpower and firepower advantage. On April 20th, 56-year-old Hitler celebrated his last birthday in the bunker. At this time, Berlin was engulfed in flames. Telegrams from outsiders wishing Hitler a happy birthday were sent, but this was more like irony. Just 10 days later, on April 30th, Hitler, with the situation hopelessly overwhelmed, committed suicide in despair. On May 2nd, the Soviet army captured the Reichstag, the symbol of German power. With the red flag hoisted atop the Reichstag, the once mighty Nazi empire was declared dead, swept along with Hitler into the ruins of history. From the outside, Hitler's life was a symbol of power and will. He was the instigator of World War II, single-handedly shaping the fate of the world. But behind this glamorous facade lay a cruel truth. The Führer had long been a slave to drugs. When we peel back the layers, we discover that what sustained him from the podium and roared in battle wasn't a so-called iron will, but rather one syringe after another. The drugs gave him a brief surge of euphoria and confidence, but they also gradually eroded his sanity and body, pushing him towards madness and destruction. Nazi Germany's seemingly formidable war machine was, in fact, built on this false drug euphoria. While it might not have given German soldiers a brief burst of astonishing combat power, it couldn't overcome the fundamental flaws in its strategy and resources. The entire empire was overdrawn, and the more it overexcited itself, the faster it collapsed. A regime built on illusions and deception, even if once mighty, will inevitably crumble. Hitler's drug addiction was not only a personal tragedy, but also a microcosm of the fate of the entire Third Reich. Seemingly powerful, but ultimately hollow, it ultimately collapsed. The absurdity of history lies in the fact that sometimes it's not grand strategies or ideals that change the world, but a small artifact or an insignificant pill. Yet, they could not overcome the fundamental flaws in their strategy and resources. The entire empire was overdrawn, and the more excited it became, the faster it collapsed. A regime built on illusions and deception, even if once mighty, ultimately cannot escape its fate of disintegration. Hitler's drug addiction was not only a personal tragedy, but also a microcosm of the fate of the entire Third Reich. Seemingly powerful, but ultimately hollow, it ultimately collapsed. The absurdity of history lies in the fact that sometimes it's not grand strategies or concepts that change the world, but a small artifact or an inconspicuous pill. Yet they could not overcome the fundamental flaws in their strategy and resources. The entire empire was overdrawn, and the more excited it became, the faster it collapsed. A regime built on illusions and deception, even if once mighty, ultimately cannot escape its fate of disintegration. Hitler's drug addiction was not only a personal tragedy, but also a microcosm of the fate of the entire Third Reich. Seemingly powerful, but ultimately hollow, it ultimately collapsed. The absurdity of history lies in the fact that sometimes it's not grand strategies or concepts that change the world, but a small artifact or an inconspicuous pill.